And it disconnects smoothly.
No warning.
No. No.
No one in the cockpit knows it, but this is a critical moment. Eldar's resistance actually turns part of the autopilot off. It takes just half a minute, but from here on, Eldar is controlling the ailerons. Eldar is actually steering the plane.
Why is it turning?
Is it turning by itself?
Yes, it is.
What seemed like an open and shut case is suddenly much more complex.
To the left, the back, the other way.
The 15-year-old flying the plane isn't the only reason they crashed. The discovery highlights an apparent flaw in how pilots are trained on the A310.
I got it, I have full throttle.
Accident investigator Vladimir Biryukov has finally discovered the terrifying sequence of events that made Aeroflot's Flight 593 fall to Earth. Captain Kudrinsky's 15-year-old son had turned the plane's control column against the programmed flight settings. This disconnected the autopilot without warning from the ailerons which turned the plane.
There. Hold it long enough and it disconnects.
How long?
The aircraft then began an uncontrolled turn to the right, which got steeper and steeper. But why didn't anyone realize the autopilot had disconnected?
Another peculiarity of the plane is that it has no alarm signaling the disengaging of the autopilot in the list channel. While our Russian planes have an alarm sounding in such an event. So I think that the captain allowed the boy to do it, irregular as it was, believing that even if the autopilot got disengaged, the crew would be alerted to the fact.
The A310 Airbus has only a small light to tell the crew the autopilot has disconnected. There's no alarm. And the Russian crew was obviously unaware of it. But there's also another reason why no one realized what was happening. The autopilot still appears to be working normally because it's controlling the plane's other functions. Although the plane is now banking, the situation isn't yet critical. At this point, if the crew takes the proper action, they can still stabilize the plane. Eldar is the first to notice that the artificial horizon is at an angle.
Why is it turning?
Is it turning by itself?
Yes, it is.
The three pilots don't understand this at all. After all, Kudrinsky returned the flight to its autopilot heading. Makarov offers an explanation.
Going into some kind of zone. We've gone into a zone, a holding pattern.
Have we?
Of course we have.
Increasing 1 degree per second. 27 degrees. Now we should be entering into the zone.
What's that?
A strange arc now appears on the navigation panel. It looks like the course a plane would take circling an airport waiting to land.
There appeared an arc very much resembling the arc that appears on the display when a plane enters a waiting zone. There are waiting zones around airports. When too many planes accumulate, they enter such a zone and circle around while they wait. But there could be no such zone at that point on the route. And yet we hear in the voice recording, "Hey, we're entering a zone."
This false holding zone distracts the crew for 9 seconds. In that time, the plane crosses a critical threshold. The Airbus is now banking at 45 degrees, far beyond its design limits. It cannot turn this steeply and maintain height. It's now losing altitude.
Guys!
But the Airbus autopilot is no longer controlling the ailerons. Its other functions try to compensate by pulling the plane's nose up and increasing power to maintain altitude. Passengers are pushed back into their seats. It's on the verge of stalling. It starts to shake like a leaf.
Hold it! Just hold it!
Part of the flight control panel now goes dark. It's a warning sign that the plane has gone beyond its design limits. From here on, the Airbus is out of control. By recreating the fatal flight, Biryukov has worked out how a lapse in judgment and concentration has resulted in a catastrophic crisis. But could the crew have saved the plane and its passengers? The pilots of Flight 593 tried to bring the plane out of its fatal dive by pulling up, but they go too far. The plane climbs steeply and stalls.
We're losing altitude.
Now we've started to spin, so what do we do?
It's coming out of the corkscrew.
Now we're leveling out. In a moment we'll come out of the dive.
All they had to do was let go. The plane has an inbuilt survival mechanism which won't allow it to stall, even at very low speed. But the pilot has to know that.
It was not the crew's fault, but their misfortune. Because if a person doesn't know how to do something, because he was never taught to, you can't really blame him.
The team's perseverance in an open and honest investigation did show that there was more than one simple cause behind the accident. Their findings benefited the whole industry, especially the revelation that the autopilot can partially disconnect. This remains a feature of the A310, as it enables pilots to control certain elements of a flight while leaving the rest to the computer. But crews are now made aware of this. Captain Kudrynsky's misfortune is that it was triggered in a way that was unexpected and difficult to detect. The crash of the Russian plane comes at a troubling time for the airline industry. In 1994, the same year that Flight 593 went down, a series of crashes in the United States raised questions about how commercial pilots handle upsets, situations in which an aircraft finds itself in extreme flying conditions.
When we think about upset in a large airplane, we think about an attitude of the airplane that's beyond what normal flight regimes would be. That is, greater than 20 degrees nose up, greater than 10 degrees nose down, and bank angles greater than 25 degrees.
Within a year, the industry had begun offering pilots upset recovery training, teaching them skills to handle extreme situations like the one on Flight 593. The tragedy of one trip to Hong Kong may have contributed something to the safety of other passengers and crew. For parents and friends of those on board, though, what happened that night is never far from their minds. Adrian DeVille's body was one of 22 that were never identified. Their remains were cremated together by the Russian authorities.
In my mind, he was asleep, and that's the way I deal with it, and, you know, he didn't know much about it.
The crew of the Airbus are buried in Mitinskoye Cemetery in Moscow, in a hero's grave, next to the firefighters who died at the Chernobyl nuclear plant. Yana and Eldar lie next to their father.
I can imagine the horror they experienced in their last moments. He knew there were not only all those people depending on him, but also his own kids.
Yes, it was a violation. Yes, he did it. But how it all happened, it was just a freak accident, a bizarre coincidence.
I can forgive the pilot. I can forgive the children because they were innocent. This man was 39 years old, and for those 39 years he had an exemplary flying career. He had a family, he was proud of them, and it was the final 5 minutes of those 39 years that went awry.
Yeah, children shouldn't have been allowed in the cockpit, I don't believe, but me saying that now won't bring Mark back, will it? But it might stop things happening in the future.